In a move that highlights Washington's readiness to assert its influence over European partners, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has issued a clear warning to the European Union. He demands that Europe significantly increase its purchases of American oil and natural gas or face the imposition of tariffs. His message, delivered via Truth Social, signals that the U.S. is ready to use its vast energy resources and trade power to shape EU purchasing behavior, leaving the bloc in a position where it has little choice but to comply. As one of the world's top producers of crude oil and a leading exporter of liquefied natural gas, the U.S. has consistently emphasized its desire to address what it sees as an unfair trade imbalance with Europe. Trump's call for large-scale purchases of U.S. oil and gas is framed as a way to correct a massive trade deficit. If Europe fails to meet these demands, Trump warns that tariffs will be applied aggressively, a tactic the EU is keen to avoid after the fallout from previous unilateral U.S. trade actions. This threat echoes tensions from 2017, when the U.S. imposed tariffs on European steel and aluminum under the pretext of national security. The EU, caught off guard, responded by strengthening its trade defense mechanisms. Today, tools like the anti-coercion instrument and the foreign subsidies regulation enable Brussels to retaliate. But these measures offer limited protection in a situation where the U.S.'s energy and trade leverage has significantly increased. Europe's dilemma is further compounded by its limited ability to diversify its energy sources. The war in Ukraine and EU sanctions on Russia have effectively severed much of Europe's access to Russian gas, forcing the bloc to seek alternatives at a time of rising energy demand and price volatility. The EU now faces a difficult decision: ease or lift sanctions on Russia to restore cheaper energy, which would likely provoke a strong response from Washington, or maintain those sanctions and rely even more heavily on U.S. fossil fuels, thereby conceding to Trump's demands. This catch-22 scenario underscores the hollowness of the EU's theoretical defense mechanisms against U.S. trade coercion when energy security is at stake. European officials are bracing for impact. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has warned that if the new U.S. administration pursues an aggressive America-first trade policy, Europe must respond in unity. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has even considered replacing Russian LNG imports with cheaper U.S. LNG. However, this would reduce Europe's dependence on Russia, while locking the continent into a costly relationship with Washington. In essence, the EU's strategic options are narrowing under U.S. pressure. With Russian pipelines blocked by sanctions of its own making, Europe cannot easily resume buying cheap Russian gas without provoking U.S. retaliation, nor can it defy Washington's demands without risking severe tariffs. Ultimately, the U.S. appears to be setting the terms, while the EU, despite having new regulatory tools, faces the grim reality of either meeting American demands or bracing for a costly trade war with limited options. In the years following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the newly established Russian Federation sought to redefine its foreign relationships and economic strategies. The European Union, similarly, was undergoing its own transformations during this period of political and economic reshaping. With both entities seeking stability and growth in a changing geopolitical landscape, they turned to one another to forge a pragmatic partnership. The 1990s marked the beginning of this evolving relationship. The EU and Russia signed the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, PCA, a landmark treaty that laid the foundation for dialogue and collaboration on a variety of issues, from political to economic matters. The PCA also introduced provisions for trade, diplomatic engagement, and mutual support on security concerns. One of the most important aspects of this agreement, however, was the growing focus on energy, an area in which both the EU and Russia would become deeply intertwined in the coming years. As Europe faced rising demand for energy to fuel its industries and economies, Russia's vast energy reserves, particularly natural gas, became an increasingly attractive resource. Throughout the 1990s, Russia's vast natural gas fields, especially in Siberia, gained prominence as a key supplier to the European market. This growing energy partnership took root and quickly became a cornerstone of the EU-Russia relationship, with Europe tapping into Russian energy resources to meet its growing energy needs. By the early 2000s, this interdependence had become a defining feature of their relationship, with Russia emerging as one of the EU's principal natural gas suppliers. By this time, Russia had developed an extensive pipeline infrastructure that connected its vast gas fields directly to Europe, ensuring a steady flow of natural gas across borders. With the combination of Russia's energy reserves and Europe's demand for reliable and affordable energy, the two parties formed a symbiotic yet asymmetrical partnership. While Russia benefited from the economic rewards of exporting its gas, Europe grew increasingly reliant on Russian energy, creating a deepening interdependence in the energy sector. As the 2000s progressed, Russia's role as Europe's primary gas supplier became more pronounced. By the mid-2000s, the EU's dependence on Russian gas was clearer than ever. Major pipeline projects, such as Yamal Europe and the first Nord Stream pipeline, which began operation in 2011, allowed Russian gas to flow steadily and reliably into European markets. These pipelines facilitated the uninterrupted supply of natural gas to European consumers, industries, and power plants, contributing to Europe's energy security. However, this increasing reliance also created an underlying tension. While many European policymakers viewed Russian gas as a valuable economic asset, they were also wary of becoming overly dependent on a single external supplier for such a critical resource. As the flow of Russian gas became central to Europe's energy stability, concerns began to surface over the vulnerability of relying on one source. These concerns were magnified during the mid-2000s when high-profile disruptions in gas supplies occurred, such as the gas disputes between Russia and transit countries like Ukraine. In 2006 and again in 2009, these disputes briefly halted gas supplies to Europe, creating a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities embedded in the system. While these disruptions were resolved without a complete breakdown in EU-Russia relations, they served as wake-up calls for European officials, prompting them to consider more diversified energy strategies and build a more resilient energy infrastructure. The situation began to evolve dramatically after 2014, when geopolitical tensions escalated between Russia and Ukraine. In response to Russia's annexation of Crimea and its support of separatist movements in eastern Ukraine, the European Union imposed a series of economic sanctions on Russia, targeting critical sectors such as finance, defense, and energy technologies. While Russian gas continued to flow into Europe relatively unhindered, the political landscape had shifted significantly. Trust between the EU and Russia eroded, and Europe's reliance on Russian energy became a point of contention. The EU, realizing the strategic risks of being overly dependent on Russian imports, embarked on a series of efforts to diversify its energy sources and reduce its vulnerability. From 2014 onwards, the European Union shifted its energy policies, focusing on enhancing energy security and promoting diversification. New initiatives included the expansion of liquefied natural gas, LNG import capacity, which allowed Europe to tap into gas supplies from other global markets. Additionally, the EU worked to establish new pipeline connections with alternative suppliers, including countries like Norway and nations in North Africa. Europe also explored the potential for importing natural gas from the United States, the Middle East, and Central Asia. These efforts were accompanied by regulatory reforms designed to strengthen the EU's internal energy market. Policies like the Third Energy Package were introduced, ensuring that energy suppliers adhered to competition laws and maintained transparency in their operations. Despite these diversification efforts, Russia remained a leading energy supplier to the EU, routinely providing around 30 to 40% of Europe's natural gas. However, by this point, the groundwork had been laid for a more flexible and less Russia-dependent energy landscape. The EU's investments in alternative energy sources, infrastructure, and regulatory measures began to reduce the bloc's overall reliance on Russian gas, offering Europe greater energy security and resilience in the face of changing geopolitical dynamics. Let's take a quick pause. If you've enjoyed this video so far, we would really appreciate it if you could hit the like button. This small action helps us reach a broader audience, and your feedback in the comments would have an even greater impact. Thank you for watching. Now let's dive back into the rest of the story. In 2022, the global energy landscape was dramatically reshaped by a series of developments tied to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, most notably the drastic reduction in Russian gas imports to Europe. The European Union, EU, already dependent on Russian natural gas for energy, found itself grappling with the challenges of this new geopolitical reality. The EU's response to the crisis was swift and multifaceted, beginning with the imposition of several rounds of sanctions aimed at weakening Russia's ability to finance its military operations. These sanctions targeted various sectors of the Russian economy, including its energy exports, as the EU sought to sever its reliance on Russian gas. Initially, the EU was reluctant to impose an outright ban on Russian gas, primarily due to its significant reliance on these energy supplies. However, the conflict in Ukraine escalated, and Europe's vulnerability became increasingly apparent. As a result, the EU adopted a range of measures, alongside voluntary decisions by member states, to reduce their dependence on Russian energy. This led to a sharp decline in Russian gas imports, a trend that has continued into 2024. One of the most significant developments occurred in December 2024, when the long-standing gas transit contract between Russia's state-owned gas company, Gazprom, and Ukraine's Naftogaz officially expired. This agreement had been in place for decades and was crucial in maintaining the stability of Europe's energy supply. The Ukrainian transit route had served as a key corridor for Russian natural gas heading west, ensuring a relatively steady supply of fuel to European consumers. Despite the political tensions surrounding this supply, it had long been seen as a dependable energy source. However, with the expiration of this agreement, both Russia and Ukraine made it clear that they had no intention of renewing the contract. This marked the end of an era for European energy security. The timing of this shift could not have been worse for the European Union. The EU was already under considerable strain to secure affordable and reliable energy supplies. Over the years, the EU had worked to diversify its energy sources, gradually moving away from its dependence on Russian gas. However, these diversification efforts had proven difficult to implement quickly, and they came with their own set of challenges, both financially and logistically. With the expiration of the Russia-Ukraine gas transit contract, Europe lost yet another traditional supply channel at a time when energy costs were already high, and infrastructure adjustments were ongoing. The search for alternative sources of energy, whether in the form of liquefied natural gas, LNG from abroad, or pipeline imports from other regions, remained fraught with uncertainties regarding both price and availability. For Russia, allowing the contract to expire was part of a broader strategic shift aimed at reducing its dependence on Ukrainian territory for energy exports. Over the past few years, Russia has been developing new routes for transporting gas to Europe, such as the Nord Stream pipelines, which bypass Ukraine entirely. This move further distanced Russia from its former transit partner, and was a calculated effort to exert greater control over its energy exports. For Ukraine, the end of this contract was both an opportunity and a challenge. On the one hand, it severed a complicated economic link with Russia that had long been a source of political tension. However, it also meant that Ukraine would lose a crucial revenue stream from transit fees, which had been an important part of its economy. The country would now need to adjust to a future without this significant source of income, forcing it to seek alternative economic strategies. For the European Union, the termination of this contract came at an exceptionally challenging time. Energy markets were already tight, with demand for natural gas exceeding supply in many regions. The EU had been attempting to secure alternative sources of energy, such as LNG imports from the United States and other countries. However, these alternatives often came at a premium, making it more expensive for European consumers and industries to meet their energy needs. In addition, Europe's ongoing efforts to develop renewable energy sources and improve energy efficiency were being hampered by the immediate need to secure more fossil fuels to fill the gap left by reduced Russian imports. The EU's long-term strategy to diversify its energy supply was increasingly under pressure as the geopolitical landscape evolved. The end of the Russia-Ukraine gas transit agreement underscored the ongoing struggle that Europe faces as it attempts to build a more resilient and diversified energy infrastructure. Despite these efforts, Europe continued to rely on energy imports, which left it vulnerable to price fluctuations and supply disruptions. In addition to the challenges posed by the end of the gas transit contract, the EU was also dealing with external pressures, such as former U.S. President Donald Trump's demands that Europe purchase greater volumes of American oil and natural gas. These demands further compounded the EU's energy challenges in several ways. First, they reduced the number of viable energy suppliers available to Europe. The EU was already struggling to diversify its energy sources in the wake of reduced Russian imports, and Trump's pressure to buy U.S. fossil fuels effectively narrowed Europe's range of choices. This situation made it more difficult for the EU to secure energy on its own terms, as it was now forced to consider U.S. energy exports more seriously. Secondly, the procurement of U.S. oil and LNG could lead to higher energy prices for European consumers and businesses. While American LNG could help fill the gap left by diminished Russian supplies, it often came at a premium compared to traditional pipeline gas from Russia. If Europe were to succumb to U.S. pressure and lock itself into long-term contracts for U.S. energy exports, it risked burdening its citizens and industries with higher energy costs at a time when they were already facing high energy bills due to the ongoing energy crisis.